Don't get too attached to her. My sister Vanessa said it with a smirk while her boyfriend, Daniel, shoved the last suitcase into the trunk. I stared at her. What? 10-year-old Sophie stood between us on my porch, holding a stuffed rabbit against her chest. One small suitcase rested beside her feet. Vanessa lowered her voice. When I come back, she won't be my responsibility anymore. My stomach tightened. What is that supposed to mean? You'll understand soon. She turned away. Vanessa. She kept walking. I looked toward Daniel. Daniel, what is she talking about? He heard me. I knew he did. But instead of answering, he climbed behind the wheel and shut the door. That was the moment something changed. Vanessa had left me responsible for a child for an entire week, while deliberately hiding what would happen to that child afterward. And judging by the way Sophie watched their car disappear, I suddenly wondered if I was the only person who didn't know. I'm Megan Harper. I was 33 then, and Vanessa had spent most of our lives telling me I was too sensitive. If I questioned her, I was dramatic. If I challenged her, I was interfering. So when she'd asked me to keep Sophie while she and Daniel traveled through Europe, I'd agreed without pushing. But this felt different. I carried Sophie's suitcase inside. You hungry? She shook her head. At dinner, she moved pasta around her plate without taking more than 2 bites. I tried keeping my voice casual. You know, if you miss your dad, you can call him whenever you want. Her fork stopped. Sophie looked up sharply. I don't need to. You sure? She nodded too quickly. That frightened reaction stayed with me. Maybe Vanessa and Daniel were separating, I thought. Maybe Sophie would live with Daniel afterward, or perhaps another relative was taking her temporarily. None of those possibilities explained why nobody would simply tell me. Around 11, I came downstairs for water and found the living room lamp still on. Sophie was curled into the corner of my couch. She wasn't sleeping. Her backpack was clutched against her chest. Sophie. She jumped. I sat several feet away. Hey, you're okay. For a few seconds, she just studied me. Then she whispered, Aunt Megan, can I ask you something? Anything. If Vanessa told you I was lying, would you believe her? I stopped. Why would Vanessa say you were lying? Sophie's fingers tightened around the backpack straps. I moved closer. Whatever you need to tell me, I'll listen first. Her eyes filled with fear. Aunt Megan, Vanessa thinks I don't know what they're going to do when they come home. And sitting there in the middle of my dark living room, I realized Vanessa's warning on the porch hadn't been a joke. So what could a 10-year-old possibly know that my sister was so desperate to keep hidden? I took Sophie into the kitchen and turned on the small light above the stove. Sit with me, I said. Start wherever you can. She climbed onto a chair, but kept her backpack in her lap. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa and Dad were fighting. About what? Me. Her voice dropped. Sophie said she had been in bed when she heard Vanessa tell Daniel, asterisk, I'm not marrying you if our whole life is going to keep revolving around Sophie. Then she heard words she didn't understand at first. Enrollment. Residential school. Placement. And something happening right after Europe. They thought I was asleep, Sophie whispered. Vanessa said it was already arranged. I forced myself not to react too quickly. Could they have been talking about changing your regular school? Sophie shook her head. Then she unzipped her backpack. I thought maybe I heard it wrong too. She pulled out several folded photocopies and slid them across the table. My eyes stopped on the heading. It was a ***, residential behavioral program, several hours away ***. I read further. One section discussed long-term placement. Then I reached the behavioral assessment. Aggressive outbursts. Repeated defiance. Destructive behavior. I looked at Sophie. Several supposed incidents had dates beside them. I recognized 2 immediately, because Sophie had been staying at my house on those exact weekends. Those incidents could not have happened the way the paperwork claimed. Where did you get these? They were beside Dad's printer. I copied them and put everything back. Then came the question I wasn't prepared for. If Dad wrote those things about me, does that mean he wants me gone too? I reached across the table. I don't know who wrote them yet, Sophie, and I'm not going to tell you something I can't prove. For once, I refused to let Vanessa's voice in my head tell me I was overreacting. I photographed every page without taking Sophie's copies away from her. Then I called Daniel. 1 ring. 2. The call was rejected. Seconds later, my phone vibrated. A message from Vanessa. Whatever Sophie told you, don't encourage her stories. I stared at it. I hadn't told Vanessa that Sophie had said anything. How does she know? Sophie whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I gathered the papers to put them back into her backpack. One page slipped from my hand and landed face down. When I picked it up, I noticed writing on the reverse side. I turned it over. At the bottom of the final authorization page was a signature. Daniel Cole. Sophie's father had signed it. The next morning, I made one decision before Vanessa could call me dramatic and turn this into my word against hers. I wasn't confronting her alone. Sophie and I were already expected at lunch at my mother's house. When we arrived, several relatives were sitting around the dining table talking about Vanessa and Daniel's Europe trip. I waited until Sophie was beside me. Mom, did Vanessa tell you Sophie was changing schools? My mother's expression barely changed. She mentioned they were looking at options. What kind of options? Mom hesitated. Vanessa said Sophie has been getting difficult. She thought some professional structure might help. My aunt looked across the table. I heard there were violent outbursts. Sophie's chair scraped backward. I never did that. The room went quiet. I finally understood what Vanessa had been doing. This wasn't a sudden decision. She had been preparing everyone to believe Sophie was the problem. I placed one photocopied page on the table. Look at these dates. Mom read it. This says Sophie destroyed property on the 14th. She was with me that entire weekend. Mom looked up. I pointed to another incident. And that one supposedly happened when she was also at my house. Nobody defended Vanessa after that. I pulled out my phone. We're asking her together. Vanessa answered on speaker. What? Why does Sophie's residential placement paperwork contain claims about things she didn't do? Silence. Then Vanessa's voice sharpened. Sophie showed you those documents. Interesting. Not what documents. She already knew exactly what I meant. Did Daniel approve this? I asked. Megan, stay out of parenting decisions that have nothing to do with you. Daniel is there. Let him answer. I heard movement on the other end. Daniel. Nothing. Did you personally agree to send Sophie away? Still nothing. Then Vanessa answered for him. We made the decision together. Sophie stared at the phone. I said, then why did you tell everyone she was violent before anybody even knew she was leaving? Vanessa snapped, because you have no idea what living with her is like. My mother flinched. Vanessa had finally said too much in front of everyone. Then she made it worse. Just have her packed Sunday night, she said. Someone will collect her Monday morning. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you mean, collect her? But Sophie had gone completely still beside me. She tugged my sleeve. I muted the call. What? Sophie leaned toward me, her face suddenly pale. That's not what she told Dad was happening Monday. What did Vanessa tell your dad? Sophie glanced at my phone, making sure Vanessa couldn't hear. She told him the school was temporary, just until things got better. My mother moved closer. But she told someone to collect you Monday. Sophie nodded, There was another paper. What paper? I don't know. Vanessa printed it when Dad wasn't there. Sophie reached for the tablet she had brought with her. I took pictures. She scrolled through several blurry photographs until one stopped me. A document lay across Vanessa's desk. Near the bottom was the name of an admissions coordinator and an email address. I copied the information. Then I contacted the residential program. I didn't claim to be Sophie's parent or legal guardian. I explained that she was temporarily in my care, that her proposed placement appeared disputed, and that family members needed to clarify what had actually been arranged. I couldn't get confidential details, but I learned enough. A Monday pickup had been scheduled, and the submitted application described a placement substantially longer than the temporary arrangement Sophie had overheard Vanessa describing to Daniel. That was when I stopped trying to solve this inside my immediate family. I called Daniel's mother, then Sophie's maternal grandparents. Sophie's grandmother went silent when I explained. Finally, she said, "Megan, we offered to take Sophie whenever Daniel needed help, more than once." "You did." Vanessa told us Daniel wanted us to stop interfering. Everything began connecting. Vanessa had kept willing relatives at a distance. She had spent months describing Sophie as unstable. Daniel had signed paperwork, and Sophie's removal had been arranged before Vanessa ever dropped her at my house. Simply refusing to hand Sophie over Monday wouldn't fix this. It could turn my doorstep into chaos while leaving her future unresolved. So Sophie's grandparents contacted appropriate family law professionals. I documented Vanessa's warning, her messages, the false dates I could personally disprove, and everything I had witnessed. Then Vanessa discovered what we were doing. The Europe trip ended early. Sunday evening, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Vanessa and Daniel on my porch. Vanessa was furious. Daniel looked exhausted. Behind them sat a car I didn't recognize. I told Sophie to stay upstairs and reached for the door. Before I could open it, headlights swept across my driveway. Another vehicle pulled in. Sophie's grandmother stepped out. Someone else climbed out beside her, carrying a document folder. Vanessa turned toward them, and whatever she had planned to say to me died on her face. Because now, she and Daniel were going to have to explain every document. I kept Sophie upstairs, while the adults gathered in my living room. Vanessa barely made it through the door before pointing at me. "You had no right to involve everyone." "No," I said. "You had no right to make Sophie disappear from her own family while telling everyone she was the problem." The documents went onto the table. I stuck to what I could prove: Vanessa's warning before Europe, the copied paperwork, the behavioral allegations with dates I knew were false, Daniel's signature, the scheduled Monday pickup. Daniel stared at the pages. "I signed for a temporary placement," he said. "Vanessa said Sophie needed structure while we figured things out." Sophie's maternal grandmother leaned forward. "We offered to take her." Daniel looked at her. "What?" Repeatedly. His eyes shifted toward Vanessa. Vanessa folded her arms. Because every time they get involved, Sophie learns she can run to somebody else instead of respecting us. "That isn't what you told me," Daniel said. Vanessa tried another direction. She went through private documents. Nobody seems concerned that Sophie was snooping. "Stop." My voice surprised even me. "We are not putting a 10-year-old on trial because she discovered adults were planning her future behind her back." Nobody contradicted me. Piece by piece, the full truth was finally impossible to hide. Vanessa didn't want Sophie in the marriage she was planning with Daniel. She had pressured him into agreeing to residential placement, exaggerated Sophie's behavior so the family would accept it, and kept relatives who had offered help at a distance. Daniel had not understood every detail of the longer arrangement. But that did not absolve him. He knew his daughter was being sent away. And he had signed. The Europe trip had given Vanessa the perfect week to keep Sophie somewhere else, while the transition was finalized. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "Can I talk to Sophie?" I went upstairs. Sophie was sitting on the edge of the bed, with her rabbit beside her. "Your dad wants to speak to you." She shook her head. Then she looked at me. "Tell Dad I heard him choose." When I repeated those words downstairs, Daniel slowly sat down. He didn't defend himself. Vanessa did. "This is insane," she snapped. "Everyone is destroying our future over one child." Silence swallowed the room. Daniel lifted his head. "One child." Vanessa realized what she had said. Daniel stood. "You mean my daughter?" For the first time since she had dropped Sophie on my porch, Vanessa had no answer ready. The Monday placement did not happen. Sophie's maternal grandparents pursued a formal caregiving arrangement with professional guidance, and Daniel agreed that Sophie should stay with them while everything was resolved properly. The false behavioral allegations were preserved and challenged, so they wouldn't quietly become part of the story adults told about her. Vanessa lost something else too: control of the family narrative. Relatives who had believed Sophie was becoming dangerous now understood they had been manipulated into seeing a child as an inconvenience. Daniel ended the engagement. That didn't magically repair his relationship with Sophie. An apology couldn't erase his signature. He had to begin the much slower work of showing, through actions, that he could put his daughter before a relationship. As for Vanessa, the woman who had controlled the information, isolated Sophie from people willing to help, and decided what everyone should believe about her ended with no control over Sophie's future at all. Months later, Sophie was living with her grandparents and attending her regular school. I saw her constantly. Nobody pressured her to forgive Vanessa. Nobody told her she had to forget what Daniel had done before she could move forward. She still kept that stuffed rabbit. But one afternoon, I noticed something missing from beside her bed. Her backpack. The same backpack she had clutched against her chest that first night at my house was hanging empty in the closet. She no longer kept it packed in case somebody suddenly decided she had to leave. Vanessa had stood on my porch and told me not to get attached because Sophie wouldn't be her responsibility anymore. She was right about one thing. Sophie stopped being Vanessa's responsibility, but only because the rest of us finally made sure Vanessa would never control her future again.